Hello, this is Ever Pierce. It is January the 16th, 2017. It is 1:40 p.m. Arizona time. Now, as we see here is I call the tree of knowledge. We have several trees of knowledge, actually. Now, as we know, let's go back in history. If you are a history buff, or if you're a person that think history is nothing but a bunch of shit. Okay. But either or, what I'm going to present to you is basically profound. The tree is iconic throughout man's timeline. From Isaac Newton, sitting at the bottom of the tree, taking notes, and what I'm about to explain to you will make a lot of sense. And even back to Adam and Eve, back in Genesis, making reference to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, means positive and negative. And then of the positive and negative, then you have two more elements that could be negative or positive, means constructive or destructive. So just like if you're hearing the wind, I don't hear the wind, as you're probably hearing in the audio, but I see the effects of the wind because you see the leaves that move around here. Now, what I want to point out here, which is in reference to what Trump has been saying, even though this is not a swamp, but what ends up happening, and we'll also touch upon, our government people with their terms as the right way and the wrong way of doing it. And I'm going to show you how we do it on the seventh heaven. Okay, so in terms of the leaves, what lesson can I learn from the leaves? Eventually, it's like a cycle of life. You have your leaves, and then it dies out, it drops them, and then new life comes in. That's what we experience here in the sixth heaven. Does it have to be that way? As far as people dying and not living to like biblical time frame of 1,000, 10,000 years old, there's a reason for that in terms of cycling. Now, when you meet certain standards of things, and so the recycling or the teaching aspect of getting old and dying is no longer needed. So a lot of things will change as evolution will start changing, where you'll have a tree where it'll stay nice and green year round, because it doesn't have to teach people a lesson. Now, as we see with the leaves, now if this was our government, essentially what Donald Trump and many other people on the Trump train has brought to the attention is we put light to a lot of things. Means we're looking down and we're seeing if the leaves in terms of symbolism means we got a house that is filthy, it's cluttered, it's messy, it's disorder, low functionality. So now in terms of these leaves, in reference to like dirty jobs with Mike Rowe, having a spiritual awakening with him. Now, he's an ABC ranking in the seventh heaven because he's really good at linking up to our youth. Because the reason for that, because every job that's out there, whether it's what you would rate it as, beneath you or above you, and as we know with the president, it seems to be a job position that everyone seems to want. But I can tell you one thing, and you can roll back the tapes with Donald Trump. He's always approached it as it's a curse and blessing at the same time, and I would only do it if I feel that our country is in desperate need of my skill sets. And that would be someone of my apprentice. Because you want to give opportunity to other people to practice their skill sets, which goes into terms of our Congress people. Essentially, what happens on the seventh heaven is, there's a term limit, meaning that if you're just occupying that position and you haven't really put anything new to what you've already done, then your term limit is pretty much up. It's kind of like when people get old and how companies treat old people as if they're like a used Bic lighter. They no longer can yield like they used to, and they put them out to pasture. So essentially, like our Congress people, it's like, if you can't bring anything more than what you've already have in the last 4 years or 8 years, then it's time to pasteurize you. Now, not in the negative sense, meaning let's bring some fresh blood in here, new ideas, whether it's Republican or Democrat or the third element or the Trinity of thinking. And that's, just by the mere example of having a president every 4 years or every 8 years if he's reelected, and then after 8 years, then he has to step down, giving opportunity, because this planet, the sixth heaven, is everyone here have met the requirements and wanted to be here for apprenticeship of leader, to be a leader of leaders. So that's why, but you have to apply it. So say, for example, I'm in the White House, or I'm an acting general, or in the Congress or lawmaker, and I just keep shoveling it out. I mean, just one good thing after another. Well, the common sense would say is that my term is not ended until I start acting neutral in that sense. So that's how as far as if you're going to pass a law, what dictates how long a person stays in office in our government is by what he or she is yielding. And so if they're not really bringing anything to the table per se of newness, then they need to take it upon themselves to bring in some new blood, new thought, and do something else. Because sometimes people get stagnated in a way in their position, is because they set so many limitations upon themselves. Some of them is natural set limitations. Now, what do I mean by that? Meaning that if you're born with a body with a penis, you're stuck with the body, no matter what your spirit is. And that's why we have gay people out there, where you got a female in a male's body, or a male's spirit in a woman's body. So depending, because as a leader of leaders, it's beneficial to know every position, every job, and the structure of it, the dynamics of it, the process of it. And just like we're learning here, if I don't clean this up, and then they'll fall again, before I know, this whole yard that we worked so hard to have a good curb appeal would just look trashy. As they would say, it would look like the projects, unkept. So it's also a reflection on you. So when our government is corrupted, and you got a lot of people in there, they're spending more time putting more effort into holding their position, then we got problems. So the key word that we're looking at is called functionality. So I hear a lot of people, especially with Miss America, they say, well, what do you want? I want world peace. Well, if I was a female and I was in Miss America, I would say, I want high functionality. Because the derivative, like a snotty nose, the snotty nose is a derivative of a cold. So world peace would be a derivative of high functionality. So when people are getting along, they're functioning together like all the pieces to a car motor, or to all the pieces to your house. I can use anything that you are familiar with, from a blow dryer to a smartphone, all the pieces to the smartphone. If any of the pieces malfunction, as we know with the Note 7, and I hope they correct the Note 7, because I have a Note 3, and I like the Note because I like the stylus pen. The stylus pen is very beneficial because I use it on my pictures. So in an event I'm doing on a web page, and there's a little spot, and I need a little small finger, I use my stylus pen. So even though this is not a swamp, and it's not fair to Trump, it's not fair to his cabinet. So when you identify certain things, you say, wait a minute, we got these people, highly qualified people coming in, and it's like everyone pretty much knows that we're at a low functionality, and it's Donald Trump didn't do it, and his cabinet didn't do it, but someone just like Mike Rowe is, he's highly respected on the seventh heaven. Now I don't know how much he remembers, in accordance to how much of his spiritual amnesia he has, but he has been one of my highest functional tool in making the connection between me and my youth there. Because sometimes when I try, on the seventh heaven is a little different. We communicate a lot different, and so there's a lost in translation. Like, it's kind of like your child looking up at you. He's 10 years old, and it's like, he's no longer wants to hang out with mom and dad, and they no longer listen to you. Well, that's some of the issues that we still have in the seventh heaven. Okay, and it's like, it's not that they don't want to listen to me, but when I start explaining things in a complex and technical, it just, by my level of evolution, they automatically shut off. And then of the 90-10, this is critical here, because even 7 billion people of a 90-10 means 10% of the people out there, which is about 700 million people, they're going to shut themselves off to certain individuals. And yes, even to a president. So a president or a leader has to be aware of this and put certain individuals in there that is like a middleman. So if you're going to have a middleman, is that he can convey the message to the middleman, and the middleman does the work of the leader. And when you start looking at the dynamics of things, and even just like the dynamics of this tree, that there's many trees, with Isaac Newton being one of my apprentice, Tesla being one of my apprentice. Now, what I was going to tell you here is, in terms of, I started fixing computers, and I fixed computers, and I've done it, and it's kind of gone down a little bit because a lot of people have tablets and everything else, so they're not problematics of things. But the tree of knowledge, going back to Genesis, the forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil, I call this my tree of knowledge. I talk to it, because I've had people call me crazy and everything, and they say, well, why are you talking to the tree, Everett? Well, you don't realize, with a hard drive, it stores information. Now, if everything in your environment, even within the body, and scientists know this, doctors know this, we have memory cells. Okay, so if there's memory cells, which is like a hard drive, or a flash drive, or SD card, we're familiar with that term. Now, back then, I couldn't explain hard drive back then, because hard drive didn't exist back then. So, my first time I had my spiritual awakening, as far as trigger mechanisms, it could be from people, it can be from anything. So I started talking to a tree, because I'm thinking, I'm in the self-discovery. I'm thinking, okay, now why would Abraham Lincoln make reference to 3 hours sharpening an axe and an hour to chop down a tree? Well, first of all, if it's a good tree, why in the fuck are you trying to chop it down? And if you chopping it down, then you better have good reasons, like you're gonna put a roof over your head. But just to chop down a tree because you just want to chop down a tree, that doesn't make any sense. But not picking on the Democrats, but more times than not, they seem to chop down trees, or metaphorically, that doesn't need to be chopped down. Or, like we know with our Congress, they plant themselves in our government, in their 30 years, 40 years, and it's like they're not adding to the progress of our nation. And like with the tree, it's so rooted down, that, it's like he's not going anywhere, but yet he's not helping our nation either. So these are the things that we got to keep mind of. And with Ted Cruz, I'm starting to believe now with genuineness that Ted Cruz, they made mention of him being a scholar. And the thing is, well, I'm an author of that, so I would be really critical of someone who is a scholar. But from the other day with him being on, I think it was Tucker, and I was like, holy shit. I mean, he came up there and he was talking, he was flawless. And I was like, okay, that's definitely a scholar. I mean, you don't reach a level of almost flawless without being that's the identification mark. So whether you're a scholar or a mercenary, see, there's all parts to, just like this tree, there's all parts. You have the roots, you have the trunk, you have the leaves. So in terms of our government, this would be we the people, the leaves, okay? And then you would say that this right here would be local government. And the roots would be like our federal government. And if the roots of this tree becomes weak and a good wind comes by, it'll blow this whole thing down. And that's why we have to be critical. And we always, how you handle people in our government is a lot different than you handle people of we the people. Meaning that as a leader of leader, president of president, if I saw you done something, especially deliberate act that could have put thousands of our Americans in jeopardy or kill people, I'd walk right up to your face, look you right in the eye, and backslap you. Because you're not doing your job. It means you got lazy, you got complacent, and you're not listening to the things and the principles, default mechanisms that I have laid in front of you. So that's why we have certain structures. That's why we don't just, like our borders, why we don't just allow people across the border. Because you want to promote those people to stay in their own country and together in unity at 51% or more. If they want something more of a democratic, then you need to contact the big brother like the United States or Russia or China, where they will step in to the government leader there and say, hey, your people have spoken. They don't want you anymore. So we're going to allow you to quietly step down, and we're going to facilitate and put, if they want a democracy, we'll help them put that together and teach some people and put some training there. But, if you're a dictatorship and if the majority of the people there like this dictatorship, then fine, that's one thing. But when you don't want to mess with evolution, meaning if it's ready to evolve and that dictator is keeping it from happening, you're actually bringing about worse things. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Just like people in our Congress, they're rooted in, and like this one has been complaining about Donald Trump, highly respected in civil liberties. But the thing is, if he hasn't added to our country, other than just taking a seat and being a seat warmer, then all due respect, please, for the love of God, step down. As they say, pick the person that will replace you, that has a brilliant mind, is smart, he's open, he's an objective and creative mind. So the tree is used a lot, symbolism, because back then in terms of evolution, and even with Isaac Newton, and this might sound weird, but Isaac Newton was talking to the tree. From Tesla to a lot of my apprentices. That's one of the things that they will know, and that we do it all the time, is you store information. And you also have to communicate. So when I first started communicating, establishing and developing this communication I had, and I didn't know where or who it was applied to, so I applied it to a tree, and next thing it's telling me who I was, who I once was, and what I did. I'm like, holy shit. It's like, and then part of the spiritual amnesia. And I said, well, that makes sense. I mean, the body has memory cells. Why wouldn't a tree have memory cells? Why wouldn't the ground? Well, if you stand back, if you were standing back from the earth, okay, the earth is Noah's Ark. Two of everything. That means you have a lot of trees, you have a lot of plants here, you have human race, human race. Yeah, despite the different tones of brown that we have, despite the different heights and sizes that we have. So, this tree, and that's why we use tree of knowledge. So, the tree of knowledge. Well, you think, well, I don't see no USB plug in here. So, if this is a tree of knowledge, just like you can use your creative mind to say, hey, if this right here was the book of life, how is it teaching me what God says? What is the default? What is it on the 10%? The 90-10. So that's just observation communication. But I'm talking about communication where I am holding a conversation with this tree, like I am right now. I'm holding a conversation with the tree, because the tree is telling me what angle to put this video. I'm having a conversation with myself, and I'm also having a conversation with God. You know, a trinity or a third element communications. So, and when they overlap, it makes your understanding to be able to identify the truth, the false, and to discover things, discover yourself. So anything from these plants, and I use the tree because, I mean, like the plants are also rooted in, but the tree is iconic because of some very famous people. And that's why I keep mentioning Mike Rowe, because it just sends goosebumps up my spine, because we brought him in because we was having issues with connecting with our youth, and he just has this natural ability, you know, even though like if you ever watch Dirty Jobs, he gets in there, and that way our youth can connect, you know. And we're going to have a video just on talking about jobs itself. And speaking of jobs, you know, where the Democrats, the radicalized Democrats, were giving LL Bean a hard time about following the Trump or being on the Trump train. And like I was saying in my other video, I said I'd buy their pair of boots and I'd nail them to my roof or whatever. And if I see they were gone, I would assume that the person that took them and spent all that time to get them, he must have really needed them for work. So I hope he'll return them in about 6 months once he gets himself on the upside with a sign out saying thank you. So there are many things, because I hear a lot of people saying, well, I don't have a book of life, you know, it's like this poor me, you know, victim role. You got to get out of that victim role, because the leader of leaders can't afford to stay in the victim role. Yeah, but you have to know it. The reason for that, because if you make up less than 1% of life that's out there, which is true, is truism, certainty of certainty of certainty, we are on Noah's Ark. But see, Noah's Ark was described back then in the Bible in a much different way, because evolution didn't understand, because they hadn't seen the earth in its entirety. So we had to put in a way that at a later time in evolution, when we bring things forward and we start explaining things, and then you'll have a spiritual awakening, and the common statement is, holy shit. This has been in front of my face this whole time, and I didn't see it. Well, for some of you guys, you weren't supposed to see it until you were ready for it in terms of your evolution and your thinking as to why Newton would be under a tree taking notes. He was talking to the tree. He was self-discovery of self. And in the things that when he started picking up in reincarnation, trying to pick up where you left off to further your research or wherever you're going in with your Tesla or Edison, you know, and that's why we use jobs. You know, I've had many jobs, and from the people in it and the job itself, you know, everyone and everything can be a trigger mechanism for your memory of the past. And that's why we have deja vu, and we have thoughts that come into our brains, and we have, you know, dreams. You know, it's like like you may have a dream of something that there's not a single television show or video out there that you would have watched that would have put that kind of image or vision in your head. So you know it came from something. So when we start breaking things down and start analyzing it from different perspectives, and see, here, it's my man right there. Highly respected man on the 7th heaven. You might know him. His name is Mr. Trump. And he's known of getting shit done. So I've been really strict in terms of my apprentice, and he just has this natural ability just to know and do things. Now, it doesn't say he's not fallible, and that's the problem with a lot of people out there, especially against the police. You know, they expect the police to be perfect, but they're just like you and me, and they get subjected, you know, to the energy that's out there with the crime and hatred, and they can get consumed by it. And that's why we treat our police a lot different, because it's like, you know, if say, for example, symbolism, if the police officer is down in the sewer and he's been crawling in 3 feet of shit, and there's people lined up to take a shower, you know, even though you say, well, he's supposed to stand in line. No, you give him a little common courtesy. You treat him just a little different, because you don't want him standing in line smelling like shit. You say, by all means, officer, go take your shower. And I use that symbolically as a parable. But that's why, and in the same way with the police, the police also have to approach we the people is they're not perfect either. And by, the feedback from Chicago, I wish, you're from Chicago, to be thankful that I'm not the president, because that shit would stop. But I would give you all the benefit of the doubt to recollect yourself and stop your nonsense. Because if I stood in, you wouldn't, no, I would declare a war zone, because that's essentially what it is. I'd bring in my military, the finest people I have, I guess some people would say is martial law. I call it your salvation. Because there are people in there that don't have the liberty because they're afraid to get out of their house, for afraid of being shot. And because if everyone is, it's like a giant prison with no rules. And I've done some research in prison. I deliberately put myself in prison so I can understand both sides of that fence. And speaking of fence, I would highly suggest watching Mr. Denzel Washington movie Fence, because there's so you can analyze that movie for 1,000 lifetimes. That's the dynamic. It's a movie of simplicity. At the same time, when you use your objective and creative mind, just like we use here on the leaves and the trunk and every aspect of this tree, I mean, you can just keep expanding and putting depth and depth and depth and depth to it. And you say, holy shit, you're right, Everett. I got more of a book of life, a book of God, than I could shake a stick at. But a lot of people don't do that, because if they do open up the real book of God, that they're going to have to get with the program, stop being victims, the victim role, where there's a lot of benefits to, and start accepting accountability. I have more respect for someone who accepts accountability. They step to me, if my general screwed up, and he says, Everett, I screwed up. For some reason, my mind wasn't thinking about this, and 10 of our soldiers died because of it, and I'm pissed off. I would have more respect for him as my general versus a general coming up and say, man, we lost 10 of our soldiers, and I didn't see this coming, and if he can't give me fucking answers, I'm going to bitch slap him. He's going to remember. Now, then after I hit him once, then he's going to sit down, because first of all, I'll make him go to every one of his family and tell them their son has passed away, and show accountability, and also give them assurance that you're going to sit down and you're going to figure out is where you messed up, is to make damn sure you don't do it again. And that's the thing is, a lot of people don't want to get into accountability. And it's like, because they think it's less than. No, when you show accountability and then you put effort towards to make sure it doesn't happen again, to the element or the effort to not do it again is like mending the wound. It's like saying I'm sorry to the victims. Because actions are louder than words. And that's why we have that quote or that saying. So, and that's why we have certain protocols of things. So, at this time in man's evolution, you don't realize how big this is, huge it is. In 4 days, Trump is going to be President Trump. And then we have a couple more hurdles. We have to get past 2018. And then once we get past January the 2nd, 2021, because 221, which is symbolism of God, then we go into leadership level 2. And I can tell you, that has never been done with the diversity of people. I mean, it's not saying it hasn't been done, but it hasn't been done on the level of the diversity of people. That's what makes it even more challenging and more difficult. And me, with a person who loves astronomical numbers, I like when you say, well, the odds are against you. And the same way with Trump. And it's like, oh, it's kind of like Jim Carrey when Dumb and Dumber, and says, I wouldn't date you for 1,000,000 years. And he goes, so there is a chance. which is actually funny. Jim Carrey, I mean, boy, I've had many spiritual awakenings with him and his humor. And because it reminded me that that's one area I need to work on. So I wanted to cover this with my tree of knowledge here, because we could sit here for the remaining of my lifetime, as what typically would be a lifetime tree. You know, I think the oldest is 120. And I wouldn't be able to cover everything. And a lot of people, which is profound, is if you learn how to truly communicate with a tree and start communicating to all, if it's energy, it's life. If it's life, it has some kind of a memory, like a hard drive. And that's how some scientists, is they do research and they just make observation and trial and error, and they put some things together and say, oh shoot, look what we got here. We got plastic. Oh shoot, what do we got here? We got aluminum. Oh shoot, what do we got here? We got wrought iron. You know, oh shoot, we got a vaccine. You know, and it just, the scientists and researchers, all they're doing is just making an observation in the forms, you know, communication. You know, observation, this is one form of communication, but actually talking to a tree. As someone, you know, if they were watching me now, they'd say, oh, there's that crazy son of a bitch. He's talking to the tree again. And I don't care. But the thing is, what they don't, it's their loss. And just like anyone out there who doesn't want to be on the Trump train or go to the inaugural, is when great things start coming about. The unfortunate part about this is those that didn't get behind, even if you didn't like Trump, and at least, if nothing else, be that support system. Back him up. You know, the whole part of it is united. United we stand. That's what Americans stand for. Whether you like the person or not. And if you're going to not like the person, at least have a list, 1,000 things on your list as to why. We hold these truths to be self-evident, and have 1,000 things as to why you don't like Trump. But the thing is, I have that list. Okay, because I wouldn't have anyone do anything that I wouldn't do. But I can tell you, that list of 1,000 I don't like Mr. Trump, I have 1,000,000. I have a list over here that I do like Mr. Trump as my apprentice, and that list is over 1,000,000 entries. Meaning his downside and his upside is just phenomenal. Just absolutely phenomenal. But see, on the seventh heaven, we don't get into this ranking, I'm better and you're better. We look on from a mechanical and a functional perspective, because we know that if any of us are not doing our job, and that's where Mike Rowe comes in, is opening up the barn door to jobs. Because a lot of people think that, oh, because you sling shit, that, you know, you're the smallest thing on the list of evolution. And that's where you're dead wrong. I slung shit, and I had a spiritual awakening that gave me a lot of information about myself and self-discovery. So anything, even if it's just doing yard work, which is what I'm doing here. This tree could have died 10 times over because of the frost and everything else. But because of my energy, and I talk to it, and I use it to store information, I store information everywhere on this planet. This planet is manufactured.